Hello, this is John Alexis Guerra Gomez, and we are in web development, the online course for Northeastern University, week 4. And this week we had our project deliverables. Congratulations for working hard on all of these projects. I'm very happy that you managed to implement like a basic homepage using just a static application using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For this week, we are going to start talking about Node.js. But before we get started with that, let me show you some other tricks and concepts that we can learn from JavaScript. So for that, I am going to continue with the repository we have been doing for the Airbnb listings. I'm going to open a terminal here in the repository, and then I'm going to open just our HTTP server. Remember, we are using in this case like an architecture that only has like a basic static HTTP server, and the version that we currently have looks something kind of like this. Basically, we just have a bunch of listings, and we created that using Bootstrap. Let me remove this that we did during office hours. And then what I want to start doing is to start working with the JavaScript part. So what I'm going to do, always remember, every time you're doing web development, make sure that you have the developer tools open so you can see anything that you're printing on the console, as you can see in here. And then we can see that in this index HTML, if I actually say collapse everything all the way to the 4th level, we are loading this main JavaScript file. And that main JavaScript file you can find here is just doing a console log, hola mundo. Okay, so reload is actually doing the updates for us. Also remember, if you're testing a basic HTML page and things like that, always tested it with a web server, like a real web server, because later, especially with things that we are going to start doing today, it might stop working. Okay, so what I want to start teaching you is how you can start creating like some modules, so we can start organizing our code a little bit better. So for that, what I'm going to do is just like a basic function in here. Let me call it like main module. And then, as you can see, Copilot is very eager to complete things for us. So for the moment, let's just disable it because it might be just getting in the way. And then for this one, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a variable called me, which is an object. Or actually, oh yeah, let's start with this. And then I'm just going to take and return that me. So if I do that, and then I go and actually call that function, if you think about this code, basically this is just a function that is creating a local variable that, and that variable I'm calling it me. We can put whatever name you want in that. And that is what is being returned. And then I have this element in here. So if I go and I just print in the console main, and then I put the main, then you can see whatever it is showing. So again, if you do that, then you can see that in here. Let me put this very small in here, a little bit more space in here. Now, I can keep on adding elements to that. So usually when I create my modules, notice the capital letter in here. I like creating an object, and this object is going to be important because it is going to contain everything that we want to make public to the outside. So for instance, if I come in here and I just go and say I'm going to have a name variable, like, or an attribute for this is going to be just saying main module. And when you do that, now you can see that the module is being exposed, contrary to me just creating this like that. Okay, so the main difference with that is that this is not exporting that, is that I just created a local variable and I'm not doing anything with that. Okay, so I could go and just, for instance, put in here, actually we can put it like to use that, name initialized. Okay, so if I do that, and then you can, if you start paying attention, I'm actually running Prettier and ESLint, which is helping me a lot, making sure that I don't have any errors. So always very important, make sure that you have all of that available. You can see that I'm initializing this code, okay, but it's not being returned. If I want to make sure that I return that, there is multiple ways of doing it. I really like doing it like this, and then basically that is just creating like a variable that is going to get exposed. Okay, so the other thing is that you can go and start adding different functions and or other elements, so you can start creating like your own code in here. So for instance, the classical example, just to explain again the whole idea of closures and the scope of variables, is that we can create a variable in here called count, okay? And then I can just go and say that my count is going to be 1. We can even just go and say this is going to be like let, because I might change the value for that. And then what I want to do is that I want to create a function that it's going to be called increment or something like that. And then what increment will do is that it will just take the counter that I have and increment it in 1. And then I want to return that counter, okay, or count, okay? So when I do that, now ESLint is telling me that I'm not using that. And this is where it starts becoming interesting. So I want you to think about this. So first question, like, what if I want to use this increment function, right? It is a function, right? So if I want to use that outside, if I come in here and I just go and say console log increment, and then just put in here increment, you can see that ESLint is actually warning us. And then right away you see that increment is not defined. The reason for that is because this is a function, but it's a function inside my main module function. So it's actually a local function. Remember that in JavaScript, functions are also treated as objects. And because they are treated as objects, what I can do in here is that I can go and say that increment is going to be an attribute of my me object. And remember, whatever I put in my me object, it is going to be exposed outside, because that is what they're being returning. It's not any magic or anything, it's just a basic function where I'm just returning some attributes in there. So with that, basically now what I can do is that if I want to use this increment outside, I have to use it in the main function, where is what I'm returning this. So I can go and just do me.increment. And then I want you to think about it. If I actually do, if I try that, then it fails because me doesn't exist outside. But I can do main.increment, and I'm not executing that yet. But think about this. If I call this, what will be the result? So pause the video for a second if you're watching this on YouTube, and then try to think, what will be the change? Okay? Good? So if you thought about that, then let me go and save this and then show you what it shows. So why is it showing like the body of the increment function? Why is it showing the body of the increment function? So if we look again at this, I did create an increment function inside. And then what I'm saying is that on the me object, and remember, this is something important from JavaScript, is that you can create an object and then modify the object and create attributes to it. So in this case, the increment function, it's going to be an attribute of the me object, which I just happen to name with exactly the same name, okay? And notice that I'm not calling the function. So this is not being assigned like a 1 or something like that. That will be different if I go and I do this, okay? If I do that, now you can see that the increment is 1, and it's printing 1 in here. Because the increment function takes the counter, increments it in 1, and then returns the current counter, okay? If you do that, then that is going to be assigned in here and it's returning there. Instead of doing that, and this is very important in JavaScript, I am not calling the increment function. So I always like, when I'm doing this class live, to ask people to say, in what line am I calling the increment function? And as of now, on this code, I'm actually not calling it anywhere. I am just passing the increment function as a variable, since it is an object. I can pass that to an attribute of another object. So now I have an object, which is me, which I just named it me, but you could name it something else that says, like, for instance, main or something like that, or to export, or something that could be more mnemonic for you. But that, it's just an object, and I'm just putting an attribute in there. Now, the cool thing about this is that since you see in here that we are printing the increment function, is kind of like we are exporting that function. And now I can just go and call this function in here, and that gives me the counter, okay? And then if I call this once again, then I have another counter, okay? I can go and create like another one of these if I want, and then main module, and then I can do a secondary, and then let's go and say that I put this in here, and then let's say that these ones are going to be main, and then actually let me remove this one and that one for the moment, and then I do secondary, and then oops, and then see here secondary. So again, stop for a second and try to think what will happen if I execute that. So if I create a main object, like which is going to be one instance of this module, and then I call the increment function on that, and then I call the increment function. So we already saw what that does. Then I create a secondary one, and then I call this one. So what will it be printed up to this level? Think for a second. And then I'm calling main again. So coming back, so basically what this should do is that this should increment once, and then show 1, then increment to 2, but then this should be a secondary counter, and that should increment to 1, whereas in here it should go to 3. Fingers crossed, I'm not making a mistake. And then if you see here, that's exactly what's happening. And then, oh yes, like actually, oh, this is good. So I can go and use this for something else. So basically you can see it incremented with 1 counter, then the same counter, and then when I go into the secondary actually starts again from 0. So this actually becomes very useful because you can use the same format for creating your own modules. If you want to create a variable that is private, like for instance this count, if I want to try to get that count, I actually don't have a way of doing that. So even if I go and I say main.count, you can see that it's showing undefined. The reason why it is showing undefined, even though there is a variable that it's inside here, is because I didn't add count to the main object, okay? If you want to get that, then you're going to need to have a getter or something like that. That could be more useful in there. So what is happening in here is that all of these things in here are local variables, and then the only ones that are going to keep on existing, that survive the ending of the function or the execution of the function, is whatever is being returned. And since that it's an object that I'm attaching things to that object or adding attributes, then the things that I'm adding are going to be available. Now, since I am exporting in a way this increment function, that function is going to have a closure on this count variable. So even though that count variable is private, is local, and it shouldn't be available outside, it still should allow you to see that when you exit. Like not to see it, but use it. Like that function has a closure on the count, okay? So this is actually a complicated concept, so I strongly recommend you to go and take a look at the documentation from the Mozilla Developer Network. You can see that I have visited that in here. There is a ton of things that you can read about that. If you're new to JavaScript or functional programming languages, this should be very enriching to you, okay? Now, the other thing that we are seeing in here is that I have this main module initialized twice. So we can change that because you can see this is a name. So you can also do another thing like this. I can go and say that name is not going to be a local variable anymore, but I also want to initialize it. So if you don't give me an attribute, I want you to be called main module, and then you can see that Copilot just woke up. So let me put it to sleep again because it might just messed up things. And then I can just go and say secondary module. So in this case, this is going to have a default value, so it's going to go with the main module, and then this other one is going to be secondary module. And then now you can see this could be a little bit better. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Okay, so for the final touches of this, what I want to do is to, or actually let me stop it in there. And please send me if you have any questions about this. And then in the next video, what I want to do is that I'm going to show you how you can actually separate your code into different modules like this if you want. You can also use classes, or there are many other techniques. I bet you can even find like documentation and modules for JavaScript in the Mozilla Developer Network, but this is just an example on how to do it. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use ESM modules for organizing your code, which is kind of like the new standard that is being supported for modules for the web, and also for anything JavaScript. And very important, please take notes of this. In this class, you can only use ESM modules. So it is very important to not use any other type of modules, and I'm going to build more on that in the next one, okay?